Hi, welcome to our second evolution lecture. Today we're going to continue talking about the evidence for evolution. Last time we talked about the fossil record and comparative anatomy. Today we'll talk about molecular biology and experimental and observational studies. All right, so first of all, molecular biology. So all organisms use the same four DNA bases, A, T, C, and G, to store genetic information. So they use the same four DNA bases in the same way, as well as the same four RNA bases in the same way to help build proteins. Get that cursor out of the way. And the same 20 amino acids to build proteins. Okay? So we talked about that a little bit before when I said, the genetic code was universal. Well, this is important from an evolutionary point of view because these are actually homologous molecules. So we talked before about homologous structures, indicating that organisms are closely related to each other, or they have it because of a common ancestor. And the same is true of these homologous molecules. So the fact that we all share these indicate that all organisms evolved from a common ancestor with these same molecules, and it points to the fact that all life on Earth has a common origin. Okay, we can use this fact that we all have the same DNA and evolved from a common ancestor to help understand how the diversity of life we see on Earth today is related to each other. Okay? So we talked a little bit about this when we talked about DNA in the DNA lecture. You can compare the DNA-based sequences to determine the evolutionary relationships. Okay, and that's like this, right? So this is looking at DNA of Homo sapiens, chimpanzees, and gorillas. And you're comparing at every place what base is there, right? If there are fewer conserved sequences, that means there are more places where they're different. And here, there's not that many because these three species are actually quite closely related. But if there are fewer conserved sequences, that means they are less related, right? It means that they've had a longer time evolving on their own since they diverged from a common ancestor, and that more differences have accumulated in the genome. Okay, but if the opposite is true, if there are more conserved sequences, which we see a lot of here in these three species, all of these are the same for all three of them. They only have a couple spots where there's differences, right? So there's more conserved sequences, so that means that these are quite closely related to each other, okay? And there's been less time since they diverged from a common ancestor, so fewer differences have accumulated in the genome. Okay. We can use this to help understand human evolution as well as the evolution of any organism. This is a cool graphic, but it has a bunch of information on it, so let me just orient you to it just a little bit. Okay, so each dot on these graphics represents 500,000 pairs of chemical bases that are being compared in the DNA. And then the color indicates how closely they share a match with humans. Okay, so these graphics are comparing DNA sequence overlap, or conservation of sequences, between humans and gorillas, humans and chimpanzees, humans and bonobos. Bonobos are another kind of primate, very similar to chimpanzees. And humans and Denisovians, which are an ancient lineage of hominids, early humans. Okay? And so what this is showing, if you just look at these four graphics, you can easily see that the gorilla has a lot more red dots, okay, than anybody else. And that means that gorillas are most distantly related to humans of these four. Okay, and then chimpanzees and bonobos actually are about equal in the amount of area that's red versus other colors. Okay, so there's quite a lot of overlap. It's thought that there's depending on your source, some people say 96% overlap, other people say as much as 99% overlap in the DNA sequences between chimps and humans. So there's a lot depending on your source. It might be a little bit more or a little bit less, but either way it's a lot. And the same is true of bonobos. And then this one, the Denisovians, this shows very few places where they're different, right? So all this light yellow means that those sequences are exactly the same, and only then there's a little bit darker yellow, so a little bit different, and then just a couple dots of red. Okay, so this kind of information could be used to understand our evolutionary history, okay? And it allows us to put together something called a phylogeny, or an evolutionary tree, which is just a graphic way to show how organisms, like different species or even different major groups of animals or plants or what have you, are related to each other. Okay, so it's kind of like a family tree in a way, except for it's looking at, you know, bigger picture. Okay, so these little spots here, let me tell you how to read these. These are called nodes. They're areas where there's branching, right? Where a ancestral species, so this would be an ancestral species here, and here, and here, and here, and here, arrow there, where they gave rise to some new group. Okay, so, you know, there was an ancestral species here. I keep hitting that. Go away. Okay, so there's an ancestral species here that gave rise both to this group of organisms, right, that gave rise to this individual or this type of organism here, and the gorillas. Okay, the gorillas are separate from everybody else because they are very much unlike the others, right? There wasn't as much overlap in their DNA. Okay, so, and then that gave rise to this species here, which then diverged and gave rise to the lineage that gave us chimps and bonobos, as well as all these hominids. So these are all different hominids. Humans, Denisovians, and Neanderthals are all hominids. Okay, so gorillas are over there because they're not that closely related. Chimps and bonobos are equally related to humans, so they're stuck there together. And what this means is there is a common ancestor here that shared characteristics that we now see in both chimps, bonobos, Denisovians, and humans. And if we had Neanderthal DNA, we would look at that as well. And that gave rise to these groups. Okay, so it's pretty cool what can be sorted out using DNA. We can also use amino acid sequences to determine evolutionary relationships. So here we are back with our hemoglobin and that beta chain of hemoglobin. It has 146 amino acids, and a lot of different animals have hemoglobin. Okay, so humans, monkeys, dogs, you know, all of these are mammals, so you would think they'd be fairly closely related. Birds are tetrapods, and then lampreys are jawless fish. They have a vertebral column, but they don't have legs, they don't have a mouth, so they're really primitive, okay, but they still have hemoglobin. And what they're doing is they're looking, comparing to humans, how many of those amino acids are the same, right, and how many are different. So the ones that are in blue that I'm circling are the same, okay, and these ones are different, okay, and they put them in order, so it's very easy to understand this. So obviously monkeys and humans share more amino acid sequences than do humans and dogs, or humans and birds, or humans and lampreys, and it goes down, right? So that there's more differences. Remember, the amino acid sequence is going to be the result of the DNA sequence. So by studying the amino acid sequence, you are also studying the amount of overlap in the DNA sequence, okay? And that allows us to say with quite a lot of certainty that humans are most closely related to rhesus monkeys out of these 4 other organisms, then dogs, then birds, then lamprey. All right, and then our final line of evidence for evolution are studies that support evolution. There are tons of them, so I have just picked a very small number to go through, essentially 1. So first of all, we'll talk about artificial selection. Artificial selection is not actually a study. It's just something humans have been doing for a really, really long time. Okay, and that's the whole idea of taking organisms that are found in nature and deciding which individuals to breed together to enhance traits that are desirable. Okay? So all modern dogs can trace their origins back to wolf ancestors that started befriending human beings a really long time ago. Then humans started deciding which of these wolves that were hanging around to breed with each other in the hopes of enhancing some characteristic that they like, right? Like maybe defending them or helping with hunting, that kind of thing. And that eventually, over a couple thousand years, gave rise to all of the variety of dog breeds that we see today, okay? Which in many cases look very different from each other and very different from the wolves. But you look at their DNA, they actually have a lot of the same DNA. They're closely related. Okay, and the same is true of many crop plants. So there's tons of food plants that humans have taken from nature and then interbred or bred with other plants to enhance traits. And here's one example using the mustard, wild mustard. Okay? Wild mustard has been used in breeding programs to create all these different kinds of vegetables. Okay? And what they did is they just took the mustard plant, and if to say create a cabbage, they took ones that had big leaves and bred them with each other to make even more big leaves. Okay? Or to make cauliflower and broccoli, those are actually eating the flowers, the unbloomed flowers, the florets. So you would take individual mustard plants that had a lot of flowers on them and interbreed them to keep enhancing that trait over and over again. Lots of plants that has been done too. Okay, and then finally today we'll go through just one study that supports evolution. And this study is also talked about in your book, so if you'd like to go through and read that. We're just going to talk about one because when we start talking about natural selection, which is the main mechanism that leads to evolution within populations, we'll be talking about some more. Okay? So there's many, and if you flip through, I don't know, any magazine that addresses science at all, such as National Geographic, you'll end up reading things about studies that support evolution. So there's tons of them. All right, so this one in particular looked at male guppy coloration, and it was an observational study. So that means that they went to a place out in nature where this setup already was, and they just observed what was going on. Okay, they didn't try to manipulate things. They just used the natural system that was already there. Okay, so guppies, here are some guppies. These are all male guppies. They're cute little fish, and they can be quite colorful. They are native to Trinidad, which is right here. It's in the Caribbean Ocean, in case you didn't know. And they like to live in streams in Trinidad. Okay, so what these researchers did was they found a stream, probably multiple streams actually, that had this setup where it had an area of deeper water and an area of shallow water. Okay, this happens to be downstream and this is upstream. And they observed that there was a difference in the fish that were living there. Okay? Downstream, where there was deep water, they found that there were guppies and predators of guppies called cichlids, okay, that like to eat the guppies. While upstream, they found that there were just guppies, no predators. Okay? So they looked at this, and what they found was that male guppies have brighter coloration when predators are present. Okay, so why would that be? Well, color is beneficial in that it attracts the females. So in a lot of animals, males are colorful. Fish, we see this all the time. In birds, we also see this, and that attracts the females. The females choose the most colorful males to mate with frequently. So color attracts mates. So that's good. You get to pass your genes on. However, it also attracts predators, and that's not so good. Okay? So when predators are present, it's beneficial to be more drab. Not completely drab, because you still want to attract some mates, but you don't want to be so bright that you can be easily seen and you get eaten. Okay? So when predators are present, but when predators are absent, it's great to be more colorful. You're not going to be eaten, and the most colorful male wins. He gets to mate the most, so by all means, be as colorful as possible. So color is selected for. Okay, so what they found was this, that downstream population evolved drab males, while the upstream population evolved colorful males. And this is actually an example of microevolution. Last lecture I talked about macroevolution, evolution that happens on these very long time scales that we can really only understand, after the fact through the fossil record or through comparing anatomy of organisms. This is an example of microevolution, and that's evolution that takes place on a short time scale, like months, years, or even when you look at bacteria, you can see it within, a month or so, if at most. But we'll talk about that next time. All right, so that concludes our 4 lines of evidence for evolution.